Hey there. Well, I am at Six Flags Great America. I just rode the Whizzer, which is a really cool ride. I'll talk more about that later. But I'm here to spend a few hours to ride as much as I can, and I'm going to tell you all about it. I'll record some clips here later, and then you can hear some music in the background, and then I'll talk about it near the end. Never been here before, excited to ride some new coasters. It's going to be fun. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks for joining me here on episode 172 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. Like you heard in the intro clip, this episode is going to be a bit different. I recently was in Chicago. I actually drove up there to see my favorite band of all time, Midnight Oil, on their final tour. They are playing a few shows in the United States. Saw them in Chicago on a Friday night. They were incredible. Oh my gosh, they were so good. I went up there, hung out with a few friends, saw the concert, and as I was thinking about it, I thought, well, I'm going to drive back Saturday morning. I was just staying one night, and I could get up and just drive home or go to some other site in Chicago, but I thought this could be a cool opportunity. Why don't I decide? I've really been itching to check out a lot more new roller coasters, especially just during the pandemic, not being able to really go anywhere. This seemed like the perfect time to go check out Six Flags Great America. It's located in Gurnee, Illinois, about 45 minutes to an hour north of Chicago. So instead of waking up and just driving home, I decided I'll go up there. Why not? I'll stay for several hours, 2 to 3 hours, try to hit as much as I can, get there before it opens, and try to hit all the coasters I can, as much else in the first few hours, and then drive home. So that's what I decided to do, and I lucked out with the weather. As I'm recording this now here in St. Louis, the temperature today is almost 100 degrees, but when I went to Six Flags Great America on June 11th, the temperature was about 70 in Chicago, which makes such a big difference, especially when you're riding coasters that are going over 70 miles an hour in a few cases. Now, I did need to prioritize because this park has so many attractions, lots of coasters, definitely too much to do in one trip. Secondary thing, I had to remember that I was going to have to then hop in the car and drive for more than 5 hours. Those two factors definitely played a role in which coasters I tried. Because, in a sense, I didn't want to have a case where I got so wiped out by doing all these crazy, intense rides, and then the ride home was not great. Also, I've noticed the few years, especially before the pandemic, like when I went to Six Flags St. Louis and Silver Dollar City and everything else, that I don't handle intense coasters as well. I can still do them. I'm not going to immediately get sick, but when you do several in a row, it can kind of wear you out. So I had to be careful with that too. Given those factors, though, I still think that it turned out great. It was a blast to get there. Really enjoyed the park, and I'm excited to tell you all about it. So I'm going to play shortly all the clips that I recorded during my stay at Six Flags Great America, similar to what I did with my Walt Disney World trip reports and some others, playing all those in a row so you can get my on-the-ground thoughts, including you can hear the background of the coasters and music and everything else. And then I'm going to come back, and I want to make sure to talk more about the park in general, because what I was able to do during my trip was a good amount of rides, but still there's a lot more there than what I experienced, so I'm going to talk about that. Also go into more background about the rides that I discussed while in the recording, dig all into that, talk a lot about the trip and how it relates to other parks I've been to. I would love to get back there because I know there's still a lot more that I would like to do. So I'm really excited to talk to you about a very different regional park than the ones I've checked out in the past. Before I do that, I wanted to mention that I'm going to do another Armchair Imagineering episode. In the past, I did a 2-part series on improving Epcot, then I did improving Tomorrowland at Disneyland. Most recently, Late last year, I did Improving Dinerland USA. In this case, I'm going to take a broader topic, similar to what I did with Epcot. This time, I'm going to focus on Disney's Hollywood Studios. So this is a broad topic, and a key factor here are your submissions. I'm going to talk about what I would like to do, but what I enjoyed the most from those past episodes is to hear from you. Whether it's sending me a quick message on Twitter, emailing me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com, or even recording audio MP3s to send me that I can play. I love that. It essentially turns it into a back and forth where I'm hearing your cool ideas and then I'm responding to them. So here's your task. Either with a message or through a recording, no more than, let's say, 3 to 4 minutes. Let's try to keep it at that so that they stay pretty short. Give me a few ideas. They could be broad. They could be bringing a franchise. They can be at a ride. Something that you would love to see happen at Disney's Hollywood Studios if you were in charge. And I will address everything that I receive. I promise I'm not going to be super selective. Obviously, I hope that knowing all of you, it will be a well thought out collection of ideas. But I would love looking at where, and again, this is Disney's Hollywood Studios as it exists right now. This is not a case where, we're looking back and saying, we can bring back a past attraction, but, let's try to get clever and creative. There's a lot of different ways you can go. Old Hollywood, Star Wars, Marvel, some other IP, not doing IP, a lot of different ways you could do it. Thrill rides, dark rides, whatever you want to do. Your task. Email me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com, Twitter, TomorrowSOC, Facebook message, if that works for you. Send your ideas, and I would love for you to do that. You can also learn more if you go to tomorrowsociety.com/DHS. That is a blog post that kind of gives you the basics about what I just described. So let's do this. The episode will probably come out in the next few months. I would love to hear from you. Send me the info as quickly as you can, and then put together a really fun episode. So let's get back to the main topic of this episode, which of course is Six Flags Great America. First of all, let's journey back less than a month ago on June 11th for my visit to this very fun Six Flags park. I hope you enjoy it. I'll come back afterwards with a lot more info, and I have a lot to say about this park, and it's going to be super fun. Let's do it. Here we go. All right, I just rode the Rmc Goliath, which was pretty awesome. I sat in the second to front row, which I know the back row is generally considered better, but I still got a lot of airtime in the front, especially that initial drop, that huge angle drop, where then you go down and up. I was lifted out of my seat, and a couple really cool inversions there too. And it was only the second RMC that I've experienced, and I would say it was great. It was a little more powerful than I expected, but I mean that in a good way. It was just, it's a lot for me. I would have to take a little break after that. I think that was pretty brutal, for not a young kid at this point. So it really does wear on you a bit, but I did enjoy it a lot. I'm getting a little confused by the layout of this park. I found myself kind of turning in circles. I'm just so used to certain parks, and instead I just feel like I keep backtracking and ending up. After Whizzer, I ended up near the entrance on accident, so I need to watch for that. But it was still, it's been good so far. Whizzer I really enjoyed, like I mentioned, just because it's kind of a unique, you have the seating is almost set up like Space Mountain used to be, where you would sit with someone basically in your lap. I didn't obviously do that, but it was just me. But I love the look through the woods. It's about 70 degrees today, which is really nice. And so I have found that doing coasters is a little nicer because you get that really good breeze, especially on something like Whizzer where you were in the woods already near the shade. And that's a Schwarzkopf and really unique ride system. So I didn't like Goliath as much as Outlaw Run. It's just really short.
and it doesn't have the woods in the same way, but it's still pretty fun. And I know it's considered one of the worst RMCs, but I think it was pretty cool. All right, I'm going to keep rolling here, head over, take a little break, but eventually head over to Raging Bull, maybe do Justice League for the break, and then keep going. Well, I just did 2 more rides. I did Justice League Battle for Metropolis, no wait, which amazed me, even though it's only been open for like an hour. And amazingly, compared to St. Louis, all the effects worked. I don't know what to do. They seem to have a few more practical areas, and the things they had all worked. And I also remembered that the last time I went to St. Louis, you had 3D glasses, and this did not. So I don't know. I have to look up if that's something they've done with all their Justice Leagues, or if I'm remembering incorrectly. I did very well. I was in the top 4%. I haven't ridden that ride in forever. But everything worked great, and that makes a huge difference. The loading seemed better than usual. The Joker was there, the fire, everything following you. When all the effects work, I think it's a good, 7, 8 out of 10 ride. It's not as my favorite interactive ride, but it's pretty solid. And then I did Raging Bull, my first B&M hypercoaster. Rode near the front, so smooth. Man, such a smooth ride. And I know it's not considered like one of the best roller coasters at this park, but I had a blast. I thought it was awesome. I've never ridden a coaster even that high, revealing, I think it's a little over 200 feet, obviously being a hypercoaster. And it was cool. Waited about 10 minutes in line, and just, like I said, so smooth, no inversions, really fun. And I also want to say, I'm only going to be here total for about 2 hours. So I have about 45 minutes left before I'm going to leave. And I want to do Viper and American Eagle for sure. Maybe Dark Knight Coaster, depending on the line. And then we'll see. And the train I wanted to do is not operating, which is unfortunate. There are a decent amount of things not operating today. All the big coasters seem to be operating. None of the water rides, because it's about 70 degrees, so I probably would have done the log flume. So that's a little disappointing, but overall, I think the operations, like they're getting the trains are running multiple trains for most rides. They're getting them in and out quickly, and that's the main thing. So no big complaints. This park is really nicely well done. I'm currently standing in an area kind of themed like the Alamo, it looks like, or a Spanish Mission in the western area. It's nicely set up. Everything's kind of weirdly put together. We have these kind of old, nice themed areas mixed in with just big coasters that don't seem to match at all. But still, pretty cool place. I'm going to take a little break and then head over to American Eagle. Okay, so just rode American Eagle, and I have to say, first of all, it's very hard to find this entrance. I wandered around it, like the coaster's on one end, almost feels like the coaster goes all the way by Raging Bull on the side, and then you get lost. Finally found the entrance, and then walked really far. I will say, there was basically no line, but it seemed like there was a line because you had to walk. The time basically that it took to walk there is the line. That's like the 10 minutes right there. My Apple Watch is very happy with me today, especially given that I keep going the wrong way. But this time I went the correct way. I just couldn't almost believe that it was this far back. Now, I will say I'm at American Eagle. I love this type of old out and back coaster. I wish it still raced. They only had the blue side open, which I don't think it races much anymore. But love that. Love the way it kind of, and there's a cool Helix where it flips you, it turns you around in the end. If you were racing, holy cow. I will say it's very rough. I mentioned Goliath, the Whizzer, and Raging Bull were all super smooth. This one, kind of hurts. I know people have mentioned it as a possibility for RMC treatment. Such a big coaster. I know they've done some large ones, but some of theirs, they kind of find ways to work in compact areas. But, it would obviously help to be retracked. I still enjoyed it. My back did not enjoy it so much. I rode kind of in the middle. But I suspect it's even rougher in the back. But it was a fun ride. I really like the first drop's nice. And like I said, going back through the woods a little bit, but with the turns, super cool. I think it's definitely worth riding. Don't get me wrong. A lot of fun. Now I'm trying to figure out how to get to Viper while talking here, because sometimes you think you go one way and it's actually the other way. So I'm going this way. All right. You get to hear my thought process as I again walk by Demon, which is kind of like the middle point where you turn around. And I may be doing extra walking, but that's okay. Gonna head for Viper. Like I said, might do Dark Knight, might try to rewrite something, but looking to head out in about 30 minutes or so. but having a really good time. It's not super crowded today. For a Saturday, I figured it'd be mobbed. Maybe it'll be mobbed by the late afternoon. Super nice day. It's like 70, cloudy. I mean, come on. Yeah, this is perfect. Especially because it's going to be in the 90s in a few days. So this is great.
Thank you for your
And I know that you're hearing a lot of, you can hear kind of the demon voice in the background there, which I am not going to choose to do. I've heard it's pretty rough. Reminds me a little bit of the Ninja, though not as tall, with a lot of inversions. I don't know if I want to put my body through that, but now we're going to mosey around towards Viper, and I will let you know how that goes. As you can hear a raging bull in the background, possibly, I gotta say that Viper was awesome. I know it's a clone of the Coney Island Cyclone, and was, from what I've heard, I think the only ride actually developed in-house and manufactured by Six Flags, which is kind of crazy. But it reminded me a lot of American Thunder at Six Flags St. Louis. Like wooden and rough, but not as rough as something like American Eagle or even the Screaming Eagle at Six Flags St. Louis. Had some great airtime. My God, I felt like I spent the entire time, we were near the back, being pulled out of my seat almost completely, like I was almost standing up into the lap bar. And what can I say? It was cool. It wasn't super rough, but just had so many moments. There was a moment where we did the first lift hill where you kind of pause at the top. I don't know if that happens every time. It happened here. And then it looked like we were going to head, like I saw another part of the coaster where you were kind of heading off like before you dropped. And I thought that was kind of one of those where you pause and turn, and then it just dropped. And I was not ready for that at all. And oh my gosh, it was cool. I'm glad I did it. It was, again, one of those ones that was much better than I expected. Just given, you know, I know it's popular, but not one of the like popular rides, most popular rides in the park. Also, this was the first time that I experienced the thing that I always enjoy, which is the ride operators making terrible puns. I wish I could have written them down. I know when I talked to Mary Kwiatkowski, she talked about the Pantheon. Ride operators were doing that at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Well, they were doing it here. I mean, they were on the level of like roses are red, violets are blue, now get on Viper kind of things, which are not good. But super fun. I'm glad I got to do it. And you know, one, there's no inversions, no giant drops, but still packs a pretty good punch. I'll have to look up the numbers, but you know, you're probably going 50 miles an hour or something. But getting closer to being finished here. Like I said, I would have loved to have ridden the train here, which would have been cool, but no luck there. So like I said, I'm gonna check out, I've heard terrible things about Dark Knight Coaster, but I'm going to check it out anyway. See if the line's too long, because I do not want to wait 40 minutes or something. But if it's not bad, I may check that out as I kind of start to mosey the entrance. And I know this is a shorter visit. There's plenty of things I have not done. X-Flight, Superman, whatever. Two reasons. One, I have to know my limits. And doing 12 coasters in a day is probably more than my limit. And two, I got to drive back to St. Louis, which is about, from here, being up north, about 5 hours straight. And of course, you got all the stops. So just want to get back at a reasonable time and do that. But I might try to do something else here. Again, tempted to ride the Whizzer again. But I'm starting to kind of figure out as we head towards the end of the day. But having a really fun time so far. And really enjoyed a lot of these. All coasters I've ridden today are new for me, which is kind of fun because it's basically just like, you know, you're starting from scratch. So it's super cool. All right, well, as I head out of the park here, I just did the Dark Knight Coaster. Man, the line wasn't even supposed to be that long, but standing in that hallway, whoo, not a comfortable experience. And I will say it probably was not worth doing. I mean, it's a fun little Dark Mouse coaster. That is good that they have different types of coasters that you can do. I appreciate that it's not all like the most thrilling rides ever. That it's a mix. I am not. Thank you. All right. So I appreciate that. I like that they have at least a dark ride with a few effects. You know, you don't see all the pre-show because you kind of blitz by it. They don't stop you there. But I will say, it's fine. You know, the lap bar though, man, it's like slammed in to my stomach more than any of the other rides I've done, really, where it was not the most comfortable experience. Part of it, could just be the way I was buckled in at the time, so I don't want to overthink it. But like I said, I'm glad that it's there. I think they need more indoor attractions. If they had something like that at Six Flags St. Louis, I would be happy, because right now we just have Justice League. So it's good to have another indoor attraction. That's great. So I'm not going to complain about that at all. I do think that, it just feels like there could be a little more there. It does have a few nice little drops, surprise drops. It's mostly just a wild mouse. No, I mean, you could say it's the type of ride that Space Mountain is, but obviously on a much smaller scale. But still, it does tend to get a decent sized weight from what I've seen, because most people can ride it, and it doesn't seem like a super fast loader because you have individual cars, so it's not like one of those with the big coaster train. I will say that it's okay. I'm glad I did it just because I hadn't experienced it before, but not a must-do for sure. One thing I wanted to mention too is I really like the entrance to this park. It's really cool with the carousel right there and everything. Double-decker carousel I did not do because I was going slow and just didn't feel like doing that, understandably so. But great ride at the front of the park. Really cool looking. I think that it's a perfect entrance, and just overall, this park just seems like a step up from, again, I'm only comparing it to Six Flags St. Louis, and I don't mean to keep railing on my home park, but this park just seems like a step up in every way. And to say this, I mean, I easily could have done another, 6-7 coasters. So all the coasters appear to be open. A lot of the flat rides weren't. Again, disappointed that they did not have the railroad open, because that would have been a nice change of pace. And I love log flumes, so I understand, given the current temperature, that maybe log flumes wouldn't be the best. But in general, had a really great time. I'm glad I got to go. I enjoyed all the coasters in some fashion. Dark Knight was probably the least. Most fun actually was Raging Bull, even more than Goliath. Loved Viper. Also enjoyed American Eagle. Whizzer was cool. Lots of fun stuff. And I will come back and talk about it more. And also, I want to talk more about the park, because obviously I didn't mention probably the biggest ride, which is Max Force, and then X-Flight and Superman and some of the others. So I'm going to go through all that, and I will do that when I return. And speaking of that, let's throw it back to Dan back in St. Louis, Missouri, in the podcast studio. Take it away, Dan.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my experiences on the ground on June 10th at Six Flags Great America. But there's plenty more to cover. I feel like it's easy for me now to look back and go, wow, I didn't do as much as I would have thought. But I have to remind myself, kind of like I said in the intro, this was a situation where I didn't have a full day to go. I really only had a few hours, and I actually extended it a little bit because I wanted to make sure I did as much as possible. But I'm pretty happy I had spotlighted the main attractions that I definitely wanted to do. And it was Goliath and Raging Bull, of course, and then trying to do others like Viper and American Eagle, and was able to do those. So overall, I feel like it worked out really well. Before we continue, I do want to mention, if you don't know that much about Six Flags Great America, give a little background about it, because it's kind of interesting. It's located in Gurnee, Illinois, which, like I said, it took me almost an hour to get there from my hotel in Chicago. Obviously, it will vary based on where you are. My hotel was in the Chinatown area, if that gives you any gauge on how far away that was, which is just south of the main downtown loop area. Well, it originally opened in 1976, but it is not one of the original Six Flags parks, like Six Flags St. Louis, Texas, and over Georgia. It was originally started as Marriott's Great America. So that's why, in a way, you do have some elements of the park that you're like, this doesn't totally feel like how I would imagine or what I've seen from Six Flags parks, because it started out as a Marriott park with theming very different. And then also now since Six Flags has come in, they added coasters and then removed them and then added different ones. And then some of the originals have hung on, but a lot of the rides and coasters are very different. So it feels more like a Six Flags park, obviously, but there are areas that feel a bit different because they come from that time under Marriott, though Six Flags has operated the park since 1984. There's also the water park, which is right there, Hurricane Harbor. That felt very similar to St. Louis and how the water park is also right there. According to Wikipedia, which is always a good gauge, They had over 3 million guests in 2017, which put them on the top 20 amusement parks in North America. Now, that doesn't sound like much when you compare it to 20 million at the Magic Kingdom, but obviously for a Six Flags park, that's pretty significant. And they have, a lot of roller coasters, 15 roller coasters, and they've had two actually that were part of that original 1976 park. One of them was called Willard's Whizzer. Now it is called the Whizzer. And then you have Demon, which originally was called Turn of the Century, but is still there. And also the double-decker Columbia Carousel, which I know I mentioned it already, but that entrance is so cool. And that goes back to the original park during that first season. And that might make you think, oh, that's why this feels so different. The entry is just not what you'd expect from a Six Flags park. And again, I'm speaking more just from my limited experience. So I know there are many different types of Six Flags parks, and many of them are different and have all types of attractions. So I am not trying to use Six Flags Park as somehow a negative. And I also mentioned American Eagle, which I'll talk about in a minute. That also was added during the Marriott time as a racing coaster in 1981. But I wanted to give you a little background just about this park and its history, because when you walk in, there is a little bit, I had a listener bring this up when I was talking about going, that you walk through and the areas just don't sort of match up, or you have these kind of nicely themed areas that look like there's something that you might have experienced in the 1970s or 80s, and then you have other areas that don't look that way. That's what I will say. And so it's an interesting mix in a way that you don't always see. Because even Six Flags ultimately opened the area that's kind of the Old West. And I thought, well, is that part of the original Marriott area? Actually, it was not, because that area feels very different than what we see now at Six Flags. And Six Flags, of course, Six Flags has been owned by a variety of companies. And, during that time, like I mentioned, I've seen whole videos online that are just coasters that have been removed from Six Flags Great America. The one that people talk about a lot is Shockwave, which was a very large roller coaster. And this was a case when Six Flags was planning to remove the Whizzer, and a lot of people objected very strongly at that point. So instead of taking out the Whizzer for Superman Ultimate Flight, they removed Shockwave, which I know it still gets brought up fairly often. So this is one of those attractions that people still talk about now. So that's interesting, because it's one of those that arrived and then was removed. Was not an original one. And Six Flags has done that. They have some very old coasters, like I mentioned, the Whizzer and American Eagle, but then they also have a lot of more newer ones, like especially Max Force being the most recent. So it's a mix of a lot of different eras and types of attractions. One thing I really like about this park compared to when I was a kid and went to Six Flags St. Louis, there were a lot of attractions that were kind of carnival-esque, but that I was able to do that were not super thrilling. You had bumper cars, you had an octopus, Momo the monster. You had some things that are there, like the Scrambler is still there, and the Buccaneer, which I believe is now themed to the Joker, is still there. But you had something called the Rush Street Flyer that was fun, that kind of spun around. But a lot of those are gone and have been replaced either by more coasters, because they need the space, or more thrilling attractions that spin you around a lot. And I totally get why they need to do that. They need to keep making updates. But one thing about Six Flags Great America that I really enjoy is they still have a lot of those types of flat rides that have been removed from St. Louis. Like Rue L'Adage is an old school bumper cars attraction, and I think it's great that that's there. So and then you have the Lobster, which is an octopus that reminds me a lot of Momo the Monster. Several kids areas. I did not spend much time in them, but there are tons of attractions. So there's a nicer mix overall of attractions, and it helps that they have more space. so they can spread things out better. You're not squished in. And so you have a lot of room where you can have different types of attractions, which I think is crucial to any type of amusement or theme park or whatever you want to call it. Is you can have your big thrill rides and your coasters. That's what draws in, probably the biggest crowds. But you need to have a variety of attractions. One, because coasters can wear you out and they might have longer lines. Two, not everyone likes those, but some people will like a log flume or a raft ride or the train or everything else. I will say that I would have been on the log flume no matter what the temperature, but unfortunately it was not open when I was there. And like I mentioned, the train was not there. So there wasn't everything there that I would have liked to have ridden, but also I have to recognize we're still fairly early in the summer. The temperature was kind of cooler, and I was only there for a limited time because, like, for example, the Aquaman ride was going to open later that day. So it wasn't a case where it wasn't going to open at all. The Aquaman Splashdown, which is a retheme, but would have been something that I would have enjoyed. I mean, you probably get really, really soaked. It reminds me a little bit of Tidal Wave in St. Louis, but appears to be more significant with a much larger drop and just a longer ride. This was called the Yankee Clipper and actually goes back to the original opening, but has been rethemed for, and now I should mention too, the latest area in Six Flags Great America, DC Universe, which is an area that is new to this year and actually opened fairly shortly before I arrived. In a sense, this is mostly a retheme of areas that were already there. But I appreciate that in this case, Six Flags is tried to, instead of getting rid of things, to take attractions that were in place, but put them together in a way that has some cohesion to it. I think that's really cool. Like, for example, I mentioned the Aquaman Splashdown. You have the DC Supervillain Swing, and then Vertical Velocity, which is a coaster that has been in place there for a long time, but was now given a new paint job and rethemed. It's been there since 2001, but now is called the Flash Vertical Velocity. It's an inverted steel coaster. It's one of those that goes back and forth and then kind of goes up and spins as you hit the top of a spike. Very cool. I did not do that one just because in general, I don't do great with attractions that take you forwards and backwards and kind of go up. Like, I think of Mr. Freeze as the example, which I think is spectacular, has a really cool launch. And this seemed to be not like Mr. Freeze in a way, but actually kind of a combination of Mr. Freeze and what you would kind of refer to as a boomerang. It's a shuttle coaster created by Intamin, but essentially goes 186 feet high and really fast and looked super impressive. But that is the standout attraction in this DC Universe area. So it also includes Batman the Ride and the Joker Free Flight Coaster. So there's a lot of attractions in this area, but everything is themed to match together. Most significantly, the Flash Vertical Velocity. They also have updated some dining experiences. Everything just seems to be put together in a nice way, and I really appreciate that about the park, in that they are thinking of ways to, okay, maybe we're not going to open a new huge coaster for $15-20 million or whatnot, but we can re-theme and update some of our other areas to at least offer something new, and maybe people are going to get more interested in rides that have been there a long time because everything fits together, especially given the current popularity of superheroes. It makes a lot of sense they would want to do that. So I'm going to talk through my whole day and go through each attraction I experienced and kind of how everything worked and all that. Before I do that, I do want to mention, I know a lot of you are huge coaster fans and want to know the most about the roller coasters at Six Flags Great America. Now, I'm going to talk about a lot of these when I am actually going through my day, but I did not do all of them. I did 6 of them, and there are a lot more than 6 roller coasters there. So I want to make sure to not give short shrift to the other coasters that are most notable in this park. So here's the coasters that I did not do that I would really like to talk more about so that you can, when you go there, you can realize the variety and some of the excitement that is there. And I'm going to start with Max Force because to me, this is the most recent coaster, and this is the one, if I look at anything I didn't do, that I really wish I had. It's located at the very front of the park. It's an S&S launched steel roller coaster. It goes up a little over 170 feet, and it has really the draw of this is the launch, which takes you nearly 80 miles an hour. It's the fastest accelerating launch in North America because it does it 1.8 seconds. But my point is, just from seeing it, is this is really probably the most thrilling attraction in terms of coasters that they have at Six Flags Great America. And it's also the most recent opening then, in the summer of 2019. So really has not been ridden by a lot of people. And from what I saw for it, it's also had the longest line at the start of the day, maintain that line throughout. So this is a case where if you go, this is where you want to go first, especially at opening, or if you're not going to get Flash Pass, you should really go here. Now, this is an interesting case because when I think about the coasters with the biggest launches in the United States, I think about King Ka and Top Thrills Dragster, which is not operating right now. King Ka at Six Flags Great Adventure is much taller, though, basically more than twice the size of Max Force. However, its launch is not as fast. This is a case where it's a very short attraction. You have a super fast launch, multiple inversions, and it's over, just like that. But I think if you're a huge coaster fan and you want to go, what do I prioritize? I mean, I'm going to talk about two coasters that I feel like are right there with this one, but this is the one I didn't experience. And the only reason, like I said, was that, it seems silly now, but I was a little nervous about what it would do to me because I've never ridden one with that fast of a launch. I mean, rock and roller coaster is one thing. This is something entirely different. And how would I handle it? And as I was getting ready to drive home, would I be concerned? But you should definitely check out Max Force. This looks like a top level coaster that you need to experience. So I want to mention that up front. They do also have Batman the Ride, and this is a case where I have many times ridden Batman the Ride at Six Flags St. Louis, and it always messes with me. I don't know what it is. I've ridden other inverted coasters, most notably Dragon Challenge or Dueling Dragons, had no problem with it at all. Something about at least the St. Louis Batman and the way it flips you around, I always come off of it feeling really woozy. So I was not going to mess with this. Also, I know that each Batman is slightly different, and I've always heard that the one in Chicago is a little bit stronger than some of the others, but also very similar. It's, been around for about 30 years, a B&M steel inverted coaster, kind of the original idea for an inverted coaster. There's Batmans all over the country, and this is one that, you're going to enjoy. Another one that I reference on the clip that I didn't do that is Demon, which is kind of an interesting one because, like we said, this is a very old coaster for the park, but it's not typically when you think about, oh, it's an old coaster, you're thinking like American Eagle, like an old wooden roller coaster, or like in St. Louis, we have Screaming Eagle. In this way, it's interesting, though, that they did make changes where they added inversions. It was done by Aerodynamics as a looping coaster. They continued to add inversions in 1980, rethemed it as the Demon, added the corkscrews. So at the beginning, it wasn't exactly the same as it is right now when it was called Turn of the Century at the beginning. And, has 4 inversions, doesn't particularly get that high. I mean, it gets up to there's a decent drop, about 100 feet. But when you see it, it looks like it's just riding near the ground the whole time. And this is a case where I had just heard that it wasn't really worth the time, that it kind of was painful. And even looking at it, it reminded me a lot of Ninja in St. Louis, which also has 4 inversions, 2 corkscrews, 2 loops. So this to me felt very similar, but it's got an interesting layout, and just because, like I said, you're so close to the ground, I've heard it's pretty intense. But this is another one where if you're kind of into the history of coasters and everything else, that you may be more interested in riding due to the history that Demon has. So that's another good one you should check out. Other one is X-Flight. This is a wing coaster. There are not a lot of B&M wing coasters in the United States. It's pretty intense. Has a bunch of inversions, has a barrel roll. But if this is something where you've never experienced a wing coaster, X-Flight would be one that I think you should check out. this was again a case where time and just nerves may have played a role. But 2012 is when this opened, and generally is very highly regarded overall as a cool wing coaster. Not one that everyone says you must ride, but another different type of B&M coaster here in this park, and not one you're going to be able to experience in a lot of different areas. And I mentioned it earlier, but another one is Superman Ultimate Flight, which is a B&M flying coaster, opened in 2003. And this is a case where it has a certain type of element that even coaster experts have gone, ooh, that one doesn't feel so good. So this is the case, the pretzel loop. Be ready if you're going to be on this one. This is what actually, like I mentioned, replaced Shockwave. Not super tall, but it's a flying coaster, and just has some very interesting elements. And again, it's an inverted coaster, which is definitely worth checking out. This is one that has a very slow loading. I noticed it that I had only been there for a short time, and 45-minute wait right off the bat. So that is another one that, again, a different type of coaster, but if you want to ride it, it needs to be one of the coasters you ride first. The feedback I'd received was, don't bother. It's not really one of the best, but I know it has its proponents. And yes, they have a Larson loop called Mardi Gras Hangover. Larson loops are not roller coasters. Not counting that one. Go away. And I mentioned Vertical Velocity. That's another one I wasn't able to do, but I think it's worth checking out, especially if you're going to hang out in that DC area. And then also in that area, you have the Joker Free Fly Coaster. I don't really like flipping like that. It's one of those where you do a free spin and flip around. If you have a very strong stomach, sure, go for it. Think it looks very cool. That's another coaster you should definitely check out. They also have some kids coasters that I did not experience, and I want to dive into what I did. So I think I've hit on the biggest highlights that I didn't experience. And I don't want to make this about, hey, Dan, you went and didn't do anything. I want to dive into what I experienced, because I feel like given the time and what I was able to do, I did a lot. And it was a really fun trip. I was nervous up front going in that the parking security, because I think about, in general, just amusement parks and that I'm not familiar with. And I'm like, I want to get there at least 30 minutes before it opens, because knowing I only had a limited amount of time, I do not want to be waiting in a giant parking line. Of course, Google Maps took me to the cast member entrance, so I got a little confused, cost me a little bit of time. It also took a little longer to get there than I hoped, but still pulled in about 10:20. It was opening at 10:30. Luckily, we're only a few cars in the line for the parking lot. Did not take long. Came up, and the security line was scary, but I will say it moved very quickly. When I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Same with the line to get it for tickets. But to their credit, everything moved quickly, was able to get to security, didn't have bags or anything, was able to get through the line for tickets without too big a problem. I did choose, of course, a line beside someone that did not, their ticket wasn't working. So that added maybe a few minutes. But I got through the gate. It was only a few minutes after 10:30. So it was not a case where, yes, I was not in early. I wanted to be in early, kind of waiting at the line to run to attractions or just to get there. Do a lot, but that was not the case. But got in there without a problem and was ready to hit a lot of attractions. So as you walk into the park, I want to again spotlight the entrance. And something that I didn't know till the news came out yesterday as I'm recording this, that Cedar Fair sold California's Great America. It's going to close in 11 years. I have not been there. That the entryway of this Six Flags Great America, owned by a different company, but both of them were Marriott's Great America, opened in 1976, and they both have a Columbia carousel that is still operating. And I love the water in the front and the view where you walk in and this double-decker carousel. I know I mentioned it on my recordings, but still, so cool. It's such a great way to have you enter the park in kind of an elegant, classic way versus it being kind of jarring, or even a lot of them have kind of these pseudo sort of like Main Street with a few basic shops. But to have such a cool carousel that goes back to the start of the park, and they're both like 100 feet high with, oh my gosh, so cool. It just really, right when you walk in, you don't have that jarring feeling that you'll have at some parks where you're kind of like you go from being out in the car and all of a sudden you're in the midst of the crowd and there's a giant coaster and everything. You go in kind of a quiet way as you go around the water there. Great way to enter the park. Now, first off, I went to the right side and went over towards where Whizzer is. And the reason being is that I had heard of all the coasters that I should check out, that Whizzer is one of the most unique rides there. And rather than trying to go for the most thrilling, my thought is I want to make sure and ride something that really there's nothing like it that you can ride anywhere else. And that's super important because, they're called Speedracer models manufactured by Anton Schwarzkopf. And this is the only one remaining. There was also one, speaking of California's Great America, called the California Whizzer, which was there till 1988 and is now gone. But this one is still operating. I mentioned it earlier that it was nearly closed when Superman was brought in, but instead they decided to close Shockwave. And that's great. I mean, not that I have nothing against Shockwave, but it's great that I still had the chance and that all of us still have the chance to ride what's such a neat idea for a coaster. And there's multiple reasons why. One of them is the way the ride vehicles are. It reminds me a lot of the seating in Space Mountain that you had originally. Now it's a bit different where you're in that 1, 2, 3. But the way Space Mountain was originally set up, it was more larger seats like that. And again, they rockets. It kind of makes sense that it's very similar in that way. And in both cases, what it does is you're very low to the track. You have just a seat belt basically, and it feels much faster and more intense than if you just looked at the numbers for speed, 42 miles an hour, height, 70 feet. The drop doesn't get higher than 64 feet, and it's not very steep, but still, you can really feel it because you're basically so close to the ground and to the terrain and everything. One of the cooler types of coasters that I've ridden in that way and packed a little more of a punch than I expected. I mean, it's one that basically anyone can ride, I feel like, unless you are averse to all things that are moving at any particularly fast speed. It's a little faster because of the ride vehicle and because of the way it uses the terrain. It has some very nice turns. I love the spiral lift hill where you're going around in a circle. It makes for one, it's just a really cool picture and image of you going up that way, but it's such a different way to go up and it allows them to not have to use as much space as if you had to go straight out a lift hill. You can do a spiral, it takes up less space, you're able to get to the top and then go through. And so Whizzer did not disappoint. It's really cool to have this type of attraction. It's in the hometown square area of the park. And just to be able to, what you want to have when you have a park with a lot of coasters is various stages, essentially, of the types of rides that you do, as whether you're a kid who's kind of slowly moving up between the various types of coasters, or even as an adult who maybe that doesn't do coasters as much. Like, as a kid, you could start with Sprocket Rockets, a Little Dipper, and then this is kind of the first one that people really don't look at as a kiddie coaster, but it's more like a family coaster. I would put it on par maybe, with like Space Mountain level, maybe even Big Thunder, a little faster than Big Thunder, but that level of intensity, because even the biggest drop is not done at a huge angle. So the top speed in the 40s, just great, just super fun. And I want to mention too, especially the trees and landscaping where you see some older pictures of the coaster from the earlier years of the park. Not nearly as much. It's built up really nicely. And I will say the lines got there pretty quickly in the morning. So if this is something you want to do, it's not going to ever probably have a 2-hour wait, but it was pulling 30, 40 minutes during most of the time I was there. I walked right on as the first thing I was doing. Glad I did so. And really appreciate that Six Flags Great America has kept this landmark attraction. It's very popular. And now I think we've hit the point too, because you have that situation where you might have an older coaster And maybe after 10 or 20 years, or even, you get into that range, and maybe it doesn't draw as well. You see this even to switch over to Walt Disney World for a minute. You saw this was like some of the Epcot Center attractions where Horizons and World of Motion, the original Journey to Imagination, couldn't get over that hump. And those also had to do with sponsors. But still, now you have Spaceship Earth and Living with the Land and a few others that now are in kind of that classic phase where they survived okay, we need to make some new changes and updates and switch to being kind of a classic. And I think the Whizzer is in that same zone where they're unlikely to replace it or do much with it because it has an established fan base. It's been designated as a coaster landmark by Ace. And just it being the last of its kind of this type of coaster, it's one that you're more likely going to see continue to be there, without many changes because people are interested in it. And again, because it's a little less intense, it draws more than maybe even some of the coasters that are a lot more thrilling in the park. Next up, I headed over to Goliath. This was the case where I thought I was walking one way and could just cut over and then realized I couldn't and ended up almost all the way back to the entrance. So did a lot of extra walking. But ultimately got over there. And one of the reasons Goliath was the one I wanted to do the most of all the rides at this park, because it was an RMC, Rocky Mountain Construction Coaster. Even though I had heard it was not one of the better ones, I have only done one other, which was Outlaw Run. And I talked to the director of the film This Is How We Roll, Taylor Bybee, on this podcast and had a great conversation and made me really want to, seeing his film and then talking with him, go check out as many RMCs as I can. The closest one to me besides this one would be at Kentucky Kingdom. But I got to this one first, and I thought it was great. I walked over there, it hadn't really gotten very crowded yet. And, when it debuted, this had multiple world records. Now, I know parks can get way overboard with world records, but when it debuted, it was the fastest wooden coaster, 72 miles an hour, tallest drop for wooden coaster, 180 feet, steepest drop, near vertical 85 degrees. The one thing I will say about this is that Goliath is fairly short, but it packs a lot into what's essentially a fairly small layout. This was the spot where Iron Wolf was, which I know I've heard multiple people tell me they really enjoyed. That went out in 2011, and then Goliath was added in 2014. I know, like I said, that it's generally considered one of the weaker RMCs, and I might agree with that if I had ridden all of them, but I wouldn't put it as good as Outlaw Run, but Outlaw Run has a great layout in terms of the terrain at Silver Dollar City. You kind of go way back into the landscape, can't really see where you're going, has some cool inversions. But this one's not as long and, maybe packs a little less of a punch, but given its size and it's still something super cool, I enjoyed it very much. And I will say that first drop is no joke. It's one of those things. It's weird too, because a lot of lift hills, when they're longer, you might go up kind of slowly or not at a steep angle. This one, I almost felt like going up the lift hill, and part of that might be the space, just not having as much space. I felt like we were already going straight up, and I'm like, this feels like a situation where if something weird happened, we would go back very quickly because you're almost going straight up, and that definitely adds to the sense of anticipation. As you're going up the ride, there's no situation where you go, oh, this is a pretty nice view. You're going up and you're like, shoot, man, we are really getting up as fast as possible. And I suspect we are going up at a very steep angle, and we're going to come down at a very steep angle, I will say. And that is definitely what happens. It's a cool coaster, and I'm glad I got to do it. And I will say, there's only 2 inversions, but the inversions are both something special. Particularly the second one, the zero gravity stall, is one of those where you do feel like you're flying, as essentially you go upside down and you stay that way. It's not your typical loop where you stay upside down for a few moments. You are up there for a long time. There's also the dive loop, where you kind of, it's kind of a half loop and then each way. But nothing on the level to me in terms of intensity of a few of the inversions on Outlaw Run. But again, still, this one is fast. I wouldn't even say rough, because rough implies like it shakes you and hurts. Instead, it's more like it packs something a lot into a short amount of time. and still is just holds up really well. I mean, it's worth going to the park for a few of these top coasters. When you have RMC and some of their designs and what they're able to do and how they're able to overall have something this intense but also fairly smooth, relatively speaking, for what you're doing, it's pretty cool. And I'm glad I got to ride it. And now it's kind of one of those things where, I rode Outlaw Run a while ago, but then, like I said, learned more about RMC, heard more about their coasters, and now I'm like, when can I ride another one? When can I go to Kentucky Kingdom? When can how quickly can I get on to some of their other coasters? And I know some of them are not in places that I'm going to get to anytime soon, but I look at it and I'm like, okay, Storm Chaser, that's something doable. When am I going to get to Lightning Rod at Dollywood? Can I get to Texas? Can I get to Georgia? Oh, Iron Gwazi, come on. There's just so much they're doing, including Air Force One that's going to open later this year. And so this is a must ride. And while even from far away, it may not look like, it's not one of those just like coasters that looks massive. It looks fairly small, but in that small area, I guarantee you it's going to be something you're going to enjoy very much. So it did not disappoint at all. If I was going to rank all the things I rode, which I will do at the end, it wouldn't be my top choice, but it would be very close. I thought it would be my favorite thing at the park, but there was one coaster that was better. I'm not there yet. I'll get to that in a little while, but now I got to head on to the next ride that I did, which was Justice League Battle for Metropolis. I ventured over to Metropolis Plaza, as it's called, which is really just Justice League Battle for Metropolis at a gift shop. But, it's all good there. But, I wasn't sure if I was even going to take the time to ride this because I've ridden it so many times at Six Flags St. Louis. It's the only indoor attraction at Six Flags St. Louis and opened there around the same time. Now, I will say this is a little bit different in that this attraction felt a little bit longer. I think there was a scene or at least a moment that was not in the St. Louis version. Now, don't quote me on that because I haven't done a side-by-side comparison. It felt a little longer, but here is the main difference. I mean, one, because I got there when I did, it was still fairly early in the day. I was able to walk right on. So that made me just be like, oh yeah, I enjoy this ride. I think it's a solid interactive dark ride, especially when there aren't that many indoor attractions in the park. There's really just two here that totally fulfill that. And so I'm like, okay, I love indoor attractions and love dark rides, like attractions where you're interacting or shooting at something. This totally fits. Now, the one thing is about the one in St. Louis that's made me less interested is a lot of the effects weren't really working anymore. At least the last time I went, which was pre-pandemic, screen turned off at one point. The Joker animatronic wasn't working. So a lot of the extra physical effects that weren't working turned it into just screens. And even one time, like I said, one of the screens wasn't working. And you have things like fire and fog and everything else. Well, I have to say, everything worked on my ride. So this was a rare case where you could see, okay, now I remember why this was fun and why it's so good. When everything works, you have this nice mix of shooting at screens and getting to go through scenes, physical sets, and everything just clicked. I also did very well, better than I think I've ever done on it. Though there was a fun moment at the end where I had a top score on the car, was in the top 4% of the day, though it was fairly early in the day. And they showed it up there and then showed a picture of the woman next to me. Which she laughed and she's like, that wasn't my score. And I thought that was funny that instead of showing a picture of me, it showed her. I don't know how that happened. In general, I think that this ride is very important. I know it's at Six Flags parks all around the country. I wish they would do something on this scale again at their parks and just fill in more. I mean, I know in St. Louis case, it was the Scooby-Doo area, that dark ride, that area that had been many things over the years, including something called the Time Tunnel, which I remember going on as a kid. And then most recently had been Scooby-Doo Ghost Blasters. It was then kind of reconfigured a little bit because it had to replace that. Here it replaced the Southwest Amphitheater, and it's kind of located between Southwest Territory and County Fair. It's an area that I think it fits well there. This is an attraction that does get fairly popular. They do have a single rider line That was a case where I walked in and just went in the normal line because there was basically like 5 people in front of me. And the ride attendant's like, sir, that there is a single rider line you could have used. I was like, I will remember that. But really, I don't think it would have saved any space. But that is something that's good to know if you're going there by yourself or you just don't have others that may not want to ride it. Because there are some screens where, they simulate going over a loop and going on a train and everything where it's pretty low key. But if you have someone that is easily motion sick and just can't handle screen-based attractions, this would not be one that they would want to do because it's still, even though I think it's pretty tame, it still does have those screens and the person is going to have to either look away or just not do it at all. In general, I think it's great that this is there and mixing it in with all the coasters. I'm glad I got to do it. It also gave me a bit of a break between doing Goliath, which was pretty intense, and our next roller coaster, which was the coaster that I enjoyed more than any other on this, which is Raging Bull. This is an interesting one because, I had not done in the past a B&M hypercoaster, which I know they're all over the place. A lot of this trip report is just me talking about how I haven't ridden a lot of roller coasters, even though I love roller coasters and want to. This was kind of, in a way, almost one of my initial forays beyond what I've done at Holiday World, Solar City, and a little bit at Universal, is just not having done a lot of these really big coasters. And like I said, I wasn't really sure how well I'd handle them. For example, with Raging Bull, this is the tallest roller coaster that I've ever ridden. And I know it's nothing compared to some of the Giga coasters or even, like I mentioned, like Kingda Ka or something. It's barely over 200 feet. But for me, this is the tallest one I've done. I've done a lot that are in the 180, like Voyage, or 170, 160, those kinds of things. But I will say, this is the tallest roller coaster in the park with a 208-foot drop. One thing that I really enjoyed about this is just how smooth it is. And I think, that's fairly common with B&M and these hypercoasters. But this was especially the case where it had an incredible opening drop. It's one of those drops where your stomach drops out, but it wasn't jarring. It just felt almost like you were just floating. And then you're down there fast as it drops you into a tunnel. And one thing that's notable about this, if you've done some other B&M hypercoasters, is that this one does not have, it's more of they call it like a twister. There's more turns versus up and downs and some of those other, it's less about getting the airtime through the hills and more about getting the airtime through turns and just getting that type of approach of up, round in circles just due to the layout. But it's still very impressive and rather large. So it is one of those cases where I think it's still one of those that it's not as popular in terms of lines as Max Force or Superman or Goliath. Partially might just be due to capacity, where in this case, Raging Bull does have the seats that go 4 across. So, and again, I'm not sure how many people it holds ultimately. That's going to allow them to have more versus one of those coasters that just has 2. So, like, the trains are pretty large. They were running multiple trains when I was there. So that made the lines go very quickly. But this is one of those where it seems imposing. It doesn't have any inversions. Very tall, has a few huge drops and turns, mostly just that initial drop. But overall, for me, somebody who doesn't love being flipped around a gazillion times, like I mentioned, I did not do like Joker with the free spinning or anything else, but really likes big drops and airtime and just kind of more that floating feeling or soaring feeling rather than feeling like your body's going 12 different directions. Raging Bull's like a perfect coaster for that for me, because I feel like it allows me to, get that thrill. It goes 73 miles an hour. It's no joke, but it doesn't feel like you have a name like Raging Bull. It makes it think like it's going to be just nuts when actually it's pretty contained overall. And I think that may be possibly why it doesn't have the reputation as much as some of the others, because you're kind of going side to side to side. You go down that big drop, go up another one. But overall, it's, I don't know how you call something that goes over 70 miles an hour and 200 feet tall tame. It's not tame. It's comforting, where I didn't feel bad at all afterwards. It was thrilling. It was fun. It's kind of the type of roller coaster that I really enjoy overall, where you do have that adrenaline rush, but it doesn't feel like it's at the expense of how you're going to feel for the rest of the day. And that's definitely the case. It makes me, again, kind of like Goliath. I really want to check out more of the B&M hypercoasters to kind of compare, okay, this is what this one was. How, is this really like an outlier, which is why people don't like it as much? Or is this something, I think people still like Raging Bull. A lot of people rank it as one of the best coasters in the park. But in general, when you hear about it, like some of the top one, of course, if you're really going to look at it, you could have even things like Fury 325 and others, but kind of thinking more the ones that are around this height, Apollo's Chariot is very well regarded. People love Candemonium. So, there are others that are really enjoyed. Mako, for theme park fans, Mako at SeaWorld Orlando is probably the one that I think a lot of people have ridden, which is one that I probably would be more likely to ride before I end up riding some of the other ones. I'd be curious to how that compares. And if you have ridden that one and ridden Raging Bull, I'd be interested in your thoughts on, Mako generally is higher regarded in terms of just things like rankings and, golden ticket awards and all those type of elements. Fury 325 is generally the one that people put on the highest level, and Apollo's Chariot is typically higher. But I'm curious about Mako especially because I think I'm more likely to get to SeaWorld before some of these other parks. But regardless, this was my favorite coaster of the day. Really enjoyed Raging Bull and think that it's one that if you go to Six Flags Great America, you should definitely check out. I'm going to try and pick up the pace a little bit here with the next few coasters that I went to. The next one I went on was American Eagle, which I found a little hard to find once again. This is all me. This isn't the park itself. But American Eagle was a racing coaster that at the time it opened in 1981 was the longest racing coaster in the world. At least currently when I was there, was not racing. They only had the blue side open. And, I've heard mixed things. I generally heard that a lot of people are hoping that RMC gives its treatment to this coaster because it has a lot of cool elements, but it's a bit on the rough side. And in a way, I agree, but I also enjoyed it. What I agree about it is that, yes, it was rough. It shakes you. It reminds me a lot of Screaming Eagle and not just because of the name Eagle, but at Six Flags St. Louis, where it's in the back of the park. It covers a huge surface area because it's an out and back coaster, wooden coaster, big first drop that then comes down and goes back up, and just a blast to ride. It's one of those situations where the coaster's going well over 60 miles an hour, has significant drops, 147 feet, and is not designed in the level like, newer coasters like a Raging Bull or even Goliath to, in a sense, to be so smooth. Now, saying all that, I still really enjoyed riding it. I can imagine if it was racing, it would be one of those that I would enjoy even more. Riding the blue side, I would say the highlight for me, beyond the initial first drop, which is a big one, is the Helix, which this is a case where, you're not just going down to the end and turning around and doing the usual turn. This 560-degree Helix, also you're kind of going downward as you go through the Helix. You're not like down low and just going around. It looks super cool. I would love it if you could do that with both trains. The look of that would be incredible. That's one of those where it's so big that you ride it and you're just like, my goodness, this is giant. It's a long out and back coaster. And the only thing is it was a little like you're riding it and you're kind of like, very jarring, but has some potential there. I think could only get better as it goes along. I don't know if a full retracking is needed because I really like the layout and the setup of the track. I just wonder if, I don't know, it's one of those situations where you can make a small change, but sometimes you see small changes and they don't always do the trick. But regardless, I still appreciate that, again, that American Eagle is there, kind of a different type of coaster that more fits kind of the model of the 1970s, really, even though it was introduced in 81. And I love the racing coaster idea. I hope at some point maybe they will continue to do that because it really does. And it's tough to say, though, because when I was there, they didn't even fill the full train. And I think part of it too is if I had any issues about it, it's just that, I mean, there's nothing they can really do about this, but it's a long walk to get there. And that's also true with my next coaster that I'm going to talk about, Viper, is that to get there, I mean, there was really no wait here. But just, you kind of enter, in the park next to some other coasters and everything, or next to some other rides. But then you walk by near where Daredevil Dive, which is like the upcharge attraction, the bungee jump ride. That wasn't open when I was there, but both entrances are right next to each other. I actually I went in the exit at first, amateur hour over here, but ultimately figured out where I was going. It's just a long walk to get there. And that's just kind of a necessity given how the park is laid out and where this coaster is. But, it reminds me a little bit of like you kind of think of Walt Disney World of Space Mountain, though you're not indoors, but now the Space Mountain doesn't have the moving walkways at the end. It's just, you're getting there and back even without a line. It's going to take you some time. But overall, I thought American Eagle was a solid coaster. I'm glad I got to do it. I love this type of coaster and appreciate that it's there and still going strong. And that's another thing, like I mentioned at the intro, is that having so many, you can have a really top-notch coaster like this, even if it's a little rough, and it cannot really have any weight, and that's great because then you have so many others that are drawing the crowds. This you can just kind of stroll onto, and I really appreciate that. Next up is Viper, and it's located in the Southwest Territory, a little further down from Raging Bull. So as you can see, I kind of went back and forth. This was not expert touring here. Like I would say, it's right near Raging Bull. You might as well just knock out both of them there. That would have been smarter. Viper's another one that a lot of its track seems to almost be outside the park. It's very close to Hurricane Harbor, where you're kind of seeing that down from where the ride actually is. And Viper has the distinction of being the only coaster that was designed in-house by Six Flags, which is super cool. And it's also, I guess you could call it a clone, but very similar to the Coney Island Cyclone, which it's definitely not the only one like that, but has some very, very much similarities with how it works. It's a wooden coaster, goes about 100 feet high, 55 miles an hour. And this is what I will say, this might have been the biggest surprise for me. I mean, Raging Bull was a surprise in that I enjoyed it even more than Goliath, but Viper was so much fun. Oh my gosh. And I will just say, I mentioned this on, there's so much airtime. You seem like you're constantly being pulled out of your seat in a fun way. Again, not in a way that made me feel sick or anything. Just really fun. Lots of drops, lots of little dips and turns that just add to the airtime. It's cool. To me, this might be the underrated gem, the kind of, I wouldn't say a hidden gem, but of the park. Like it's one that someone said, okay, what are the things I have to do? These are of the ones I did, so I'm narrowing it down. I would say do Goliath, do Raging Bull, do Viper. And I'd probably say Max Force even though I didn't do it. But of the ones I did, those three. And Viper would be the third one I'd list, but just barely. It's really cool. This is a case where I did wait a while in the station. There was no one really in line. I think it was listed at like 10 minutes. Again, long walk to get to it. But in the station, you had a situation where they were running several trains, I believe just 2 trains, and it did take a while to ultimately get there. I mean, a while meaning like 15, 20 minutes. I'm not talking crazy, but did seem a bit slower. But still, this is, again, this reminds me a lot of American Thunder at Six Flags St. Louis, which I don't believe is as high, but a similar situation where this is a bit bigger, but they just they really do a good job in providing you with a lot of packing quite a punch in a fun way within, I wouldn't say a small area, but not a huge area. Several minutes, just constantly, everyone's laughing and enjoying it. And it's one of those too, where it's like I told you about kind of the stages of going upward. It's more intense than Whizzer, obviously, but it's one of those where you could do it where it's not flipping you around 100 times. It's like a next step up and a little less rough and a little slower than American Eagle, but to me more essential in terms of one that you have to do. Really cool. I'm glad that I got to do it. Viper, do not sleep on this coaster. I was so happy that I did it because it was one of my favorite times, just pure fun that I had on any coaster in the park. We have reached the final attraction that I experienced, which, not the best one that I did, the Dark Knight coaster, which I know is also one you can ride at Six Flags Great Adventure and Six Flags Mexico. So many of you have probably experienced it. This is the other indoor attraction that I mentioned, which is a Wild Mouse coaster in the Orleans Place area. It replaced Theater Royale, which is so odd that this is basically like you're in Gotham City and you're getting on like a subway car at the rail station. I don't know what this has to do with Orleans Place. You're right next to that. It's just, I don't know. But I will say, I appreciate the fact that they have I would call it a dark ride. I know it's a coaster, but an indoor coaster with sets and that is putting together a story and a theme and all of that. I appreciate that. And it is one that I think, like, for example, if I was there with my daughters, they could do this just fine. So to have another attraction that has some thrills, but that they could still do. And I like the way you're kind of in your own car where it's basically just, you have 4 riders in a car, 2 rows. So we would get our own car if we were there. And we're able to do this Wild Mouse, which mostly goes side to side, but it does pass some figures and, kind of theme to the Dark Knight movie. And you even have a pre-show where Aaron Eckhart appears, Harvey Dent from The Dark Knight. The positives are that you've got a few nice drops, but it's fairly quick. It's just a different type of ride. It goes up to 30 miles an hour, but the drops aren't bad. It's fairly quick. So I will say the positives are that. I would say it kind of feels not like the most essential ride you would have to do. This is when I talk about, what I should have maybe done Max Force or something. I mean, you're not comparing the two. They're completely different. It's an indoor dark ride that most people can do as a Wild Mouse coaster versus one of the most possibly intense or thrilling attractions in the park. Don't really connect. But in hindsight, I just felt like whenever I'm at a park that's like a regional park, having, obviously I focus a lot on Disney and some on Universal. I want to do any of their indoor attractions, any of them that have some theming. And that's the case here, where I really wanted to check it out because I was curious about, okay, they have an indoor coaster and it has some theme and, it has a pre-show and, the setting of the subway and all of that. So that's something that I wanted to experience. This is a Mock Rides were the ones who actually put this in. It's nice to see. I do think this is a coaster where it doesn't have a massive capacity. And so the lines do build up pretty quickly. So that's something to be wary of, is that you might end up waiting in line. And also it's a case where, like Justice League or like Whizzer, more people feel comfortable doing this. So it could be another case where more people are going to want to ride it. And so that could impact it too. I would say if you are going to this park and your goal is, I want to do all the biggest coasters, all the either the historical ones like Whizzer or American Eagle, or just the more newer, thrilling ones like Goliath and Max Force, you may be able to skip this. I would say if you're trying to be a completist, I would actually check it out fairly early in the day if you're not getting Flash Pass, because it could get a long line. Or if you're somebody that just is really interested, like me, in indoor attractions, theme, and dark rides, then you should check it out. I would say of everything I did, it was the one that didn't stick with me as much. There weren't any total duds. It's just one that I think is secondary. But again, I've talked about this recently a lot, where I'm thinking about not this attraction in particular going in Walt Disney World, but Walt Disney World needing to add more complimentary attractions. Not attractions that are cheap, not spinners, but ones that are essentially like fill in the gaps. To me, that's what this is. This is a case where no one's going to likely go to this park just to ride this, but they may be like, hey, it's inside, especially on a hot day. I was not there on a hot day. Sure, I'll go check it out. And that's how I feel about the Dark Knight coaster. It's if you were going to rank, if I was able to do all 15 coasters, I suspect this would not make the top 10, but that does not mean it was a terrible coaster. It just means that a lot of the other things I did were great. And there's only so many spots on the list, and I didn't do everything. So I don't regret doing this because I haven't done the Dark Knight coaster before. I'd say for what it is, it meets expectations. It's just not like the first thing you should be doing if you're really trying to spotlight what you want to do at this park. So, summing things up, here is how I would rank all the attractions that I experienced during my trip. We are going to start with number 7 being the Dark Knight Coaster. Sorry, Dark Knight Coaster. It's really just because there's a lot of other great things out there. Number 6 would be American Eagle, which I still enjoyed a lot. It's just a little bit rough. Really, any of these top 6, I would say, are definitely worth checking out. Even number 7, I went through it already, but I think not a disaster for sure. Number 5. I'll put number 5 as Justice League Battle for Metropolis, which I really like. I think it's a cool, interactive shooting dark ride. It's just that the top 4 coasters I had a blast with. And I'm going to say number 4 for me is Whizzer, even though I think Whizzer is super cool. Love the way the cars are situated, love the landscaping. Just the top 3 were just so much fun for me. Number 3 is Viper, which, like I mentioned, was a real surprise for me. So much fun, tons of airtime. One of those that you look at and you think, oh, that's a solid coaster, but it really blew me out of the water. Number 2 is Goliath, great RMC coaster, and I'm so glad I got to do another RMC, and several of the inversions are really top notch. Number 1 for me, like I mentioned, Raging Bull. Just loved how smooth it was. The first drop's incredible. It's everything I'm looking for in a coaster in that it didn't make me feel sick. It was thrilling, lots of adrenaline, so much fun. And this list feels really incomplete because there's so many more things to do at Six Flags Great America. I did want to say that I hope as the summer goes along, the park will continue to open more attractions, like the railroad was closed. I'm not sure if they're opening the log flume this summer or not, that they would have Aquaman open all day, and then some of the other attractions. I mean, granted, they may have just been slowly opening them as the day went on, but I know there were some that were not going to open for the day. So I did want to mention that I hope that they continue. I'm sure some of it is staffing. Some of it may just be, I know, like with their raft ride, they're totally redoing a lot of it. I just hope that all those can eventually reopen on the busiest days, or because I've raved about just the variety of attractions and how many things they have to do at Great America. And part of that is having most, I mean, you're never going to have every single thing open on every single day. And the coasters were all basically open. I just hope that more things continue to get open as the changes from the shutdown in 2020 and all of that start to at least be moved closer to I hate to use the word normal, but towards something where we're going to be similar for the future, that more things are able to open. But regardless, given the amount of time I spent and the just limitations I had with driving home that day and everything, I had a great time. I'm so glad I got to visit it. And because there's still over half the coasters I haven't done, I would love to go back there some point. Don't think it's going to happen this summer, but it would be great to go back and get to fill in the gaps. And even some of the ones that I was a little skittish on, trying to check out X-Flight and Superman and Max Force and Demon. Those are the ones where I'm like, it'd be really great. And even Little Dipper. And I would love to go there with my daughters, because I do think then going with them, I'm going to find myself doing some more of the other attractions that are open, especially if it's on the right day when most of them are open. So I'm curious for you, if you've been to Six Flags Great America, if you've ridden some of these rides, what did you think about them? What do you think of my rankings of the ones that I experienced and then my individual descriptions? Is it a park that you're considering going to in the future? I would love to hear all about that, because I was surprised in a good way with what I experienced there, especially compared to my local park, Six Flags St. Louis, which does have some cool stuff in it. It's just lately I haven't had as good of experience, I think partially just due to, again, staffing and the company just kind of having to focus on certain other parks in a way. Regardless, I think it was cool to get there, and I hope you've enjoyed this trip report to Six Flags Great America. It's amazing how long I could talk about only having been there for a fairly short time. But if you've experienced my Disney World trip report recently, you know that is how things go. So that is going to do it for this episode of the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks so much for listening, as always. If you enjoyed this trip report, go to tomorrowsociety.com/podcast with an S at the end. You can check out trip reports I've done for Silver Dollar City, the Lincoln Museum in Springfield, Alani, Walt Disney World, multiple trips there, and Six Flags St. Louis from a while back. It's really fun to do these trip reports. I hope that you enjoy them, and I would love to do them in the future. If you'd like to help support the show, go to patreon.com/Tomorrow Society, where you can make a small monthly contribution and get access to some really cool perks. You can also leave a one-time contribution by buying me a Dole Whip at tomorrowsociety.com/Dole Whip. I'd love to hear what you think of this episode. Send me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Follow me on Twitter, TomorrowSOC, Facebook, or Instagram at Tomorrow Society. Don't forget to submit your ideas for improving Disney's Hollywood studios. Go to tomorrowsociety.com/DHS. To learn more, I would love to hear your thoughts, especially on MP3, but an email, message, whatever you've got. It would be great to have you all involved in this episode where we dig into the entire Studios Park and what we'd like to see happen there. The music that you are hearing right now was written by Adam Hookey, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I will be talking with Adam Bizark of the Bizarre Company. We talk about his work on many cool attractions, including Terminator 3D, Jurassic Park The Ride, Shanghai Disneyland and their Pirates of the Caribbean attraction, the Space Shuttle experience at Cape Canaveral, so much more. It was awesome to talk to Adam. I can't wait for you to hear this show. I hope you're all doing okay out there. I know it's a difficult time in a lot of different ways. I hope this show gives you a little bit of a break. You hear me ramble on about going to an amusement park and allows you to think about something else because, I'm definitely thinking about all of you, and I really appreciate the time that you take to listen to this show, to help support it. I hope it helps you in at least a small way to deal with everything else going on in the world. Thanks so much for listening. I'll talk to you again next time.